They say in a crisis you find out who your real family is. I found out the hard way. The day my husband, the love of my life, was killed, I called my parents, needing them more than I've ever needed anyone. Their response from the middle of my brother's 30th birthday party? Sorry, we're busy. We'll call you tomorrow. And they hung up. A few days later, they walked into my home, looked me in my tear-filled eyes, and demanded half of everything Mark had left behind. They saw a grieving widow they could manipulate. What they didn't see was the trap my brilliant husband had set for them years ago, a final gift to me, and a special inheritance just for them. This is the story of how my family chose greed over grief, and how a single envelope, handed to them by my 8-year-old daughter, led to their complete downfall. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss a single chapter of this wild ride. Let me know what city you're reading from in the comments below. I want to see how far this story goes. The world ended on a Tuesday. It had the audacity to be a beautiful day, the kind of late spring afternoon in Seattle where the sun breaks through the persistent clouds and makes you believe summer might actually come. The air, clean and smelling of damp earth and blooming rhododendrons, drifted through the open kitchen window. I was humming along to some forgotten 90s rock song on the radio, my hands deep in potting soil, transferring a basil plant into a larger terracotta pot. You're going to kill that one, too? A voice said from the doorway. I looked up, feigning a scowl. Mark leaned against the frame, a lopsided, heart-stopping grin on his face. He'd shed his work jacket, and his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee, one of which he extended to me. It's a basil plant, not a delicate orchid, I retorted, taking the mug. And for the record, my last 3 victims were cilantro. They're notoriously dramatic. He chuckled, the sound a warm, familiar rumble that settled in my chest. Whatever you say, plant killer. He came over and kissed the top of my head, his lips warm against my hair. Lily's in the living room, drawing what she calls the official map to the bears. Apparently, Yellowstone is just past the big fir tree at the end of our street. I smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile. This was my life. This quiet, beautiful, mundane moment. This was the universe I had built with this man. A universe that revolved around basil plants, bad radio songs, and the cartographical fantasies of our 8-year-old daughter. Our trip to the national parks was all Mark's idea. He was an analyst for a software company downtown, a job that was mentally taxing and kept him chained to a desk. He craved open spaces. For months, our dining table had been littered with maps and guidebooks. He'd bought a new tent, sleeping bags rated for cold mountain nights, and a ridiculous safari-style hat that Lily adored. The map is looking very official, Mark said, peering over Lily's shoulder. She was on the floor, surrounded by colored pencils, her tongue sticking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. Daddy, I marked the best spot for Esmores, she announced, pointing a crayon at a large brown smudge on the paper. It's next to the geyser, so the marshmallows will get extra toasty. A brilliant tactical decision, Commander Lily, Mark said with a mock salute. She giggled, a sound like wind chimes. That was the last time I heard her giggle like that. The afternoon wore on. Mark went to the garage to tinker with the new camping stove. Lily, map completed, moved on to building a Lego castle. I was folding laundry in our bedroom, the scent of lavender and clean cotton filling the air. The pile of Mark's t-shirts was next to me, soft and smelling of him. I picked one up, a faded blue one from his college days, and held it to my face for a second, breathing him in. That's when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, local area code. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call. But something made me answer. Hello. Am I speaking with Clara Vance? The voice was male, calm, and professional.
Too calm.
Yes, this is she. Mrs. Vance, my name is Officer Miller with the Washington State Patrol. I'm calling regarding your husband, Mark Vance. The laundry basket slipped from my hands. The neatly folded clothes tumbled to the floor in a soft, silent heap. The world seemed to narrow to the small black rectangle pressed against my ear. My own breathing sounded impossibly loud. Is he okay? The words felt like swallowing sand. There was a pause on the other end, a professionally calibrated hesitation that told me everything before he said a word. It was the pause of someone who had delivered bad news before, who knew the precise weight of the silence that precedes a life-shattering. Mrs. Vance, there was an accident on I-5, near the Ship Canal Bridge. A multi-car pileup. I'm very sorry to tell you this, but your husband, he didn't survive. He kept talking. I know he did. Words like paramedics, scene, and coroner floated in the air, but they didn't connect. They were just sounds. My mind had latched onto two words, didn't survive, and it refused to process anything else. The basil plant on the kitchen counter, the half-finished Lego castle, the map to the bears, it was all from another lifetime. A lifetime that had ended just moments ago without my permission. I sank to the floor, surrounded by the scent of my husband's clothes, in a house that was suddenly, terrifyingly, just a house. Numbness is a strange thing. It's a mercy, I suppose, a buffer the mind throws up against a pain too large to comprehend. For a few minutes, or maybe it was an hour, I just sat on the floor, the phone lying beside me. I could hear Lily downstairs, narrating a story to her Lego figures. Her innocent voice was a shard of glass in the thick, suffocating silence of my new reality. Then the numbness receded, and the first wave of pure, unadulterated agony hit me. It was a physical force, a fist clenching in my gut, stealing my breath. A sob tore its way out of my throat, raw and animalistic. I needed my mom. In that moment of primal panic, my brain defaulted to its oldest programming. When you're hurt, you call your mother. It wasn't a thought, it was an instinct. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled past Mark's parents, past my best friend, and found Mom. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, a third time. I almost hung up, the thought of leaving a voicemail about my dead husband too grotesque to consider. Then she answered. The first thing I heard wasn't her voice. It was noise. Loud, joyful noise. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, and a chorus of people singing a painfully off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. Clara? My mother's voice, when it came, was strained with annoyance. What is it? You're on speaker. We're all here for Ethan's party. On speaker. The thought barely registered. My entire world had just been obliterated, and I was background noise at my brother's 30th birthday party. Mom. I tried, but my voice broke. All that came out was a choked gasp. Clara, for heaven's sake, spit it out, she said, her impatience sharp. Is this about the money for the car repair? Your father and I said we discuss it next week. No, I whispered, tears streaming down my face, dripping onto the phone screen. It's Mark. I could hear my brother Ethan in the background. Tell her to call back later. We're cutting the cake. Just a second, honey. My mother cooed, her voice for him instantly sweet, a tone she hadn't used with me since I was a child. Then, back to me, her voice hardened again. Clara, this really isn't a good time. Can this wait? The question was so absurd, so colossally out of sync with the gravity of my reality, that for a second, I couldn't breathe. Wait? Could the death of my husband, the father of my child, the center of my universe, wait? Mom, I said, forcing the words out through the tidal wave of grief. Mark's dead. The party sounds didn't stop. They may have dipped for a nanosecond, but the laughter and chatter continued, a festive soundtrack to the worst moment of my life. There was a brief silence on her end, a beat of static. I waited for the gasp. For the, oh my God, Clara. For the, I'm on my way. For any sign that the woman who gave birth to me possessed a single shred of human empathy. What I got was this. Oh. Just oh. An exhale of inconvenience. The kind of sound you make when you realize you're out of milk. Then she said the words that would be burned into my memory forever, the words that would become the foundation of the cold, hard thing that would grow in my heart. Well, we can't just leave. It's Ethan's 30th. It's a milestone. Well, we'll call you tomorrow. And then a click. She hung up. I stared at the phone, at the call-ended screen. She hung up on me. My husband was dead, and my family was busy at a party. The pain of Mark's loss was a gaping wound, but this was a different kind of pain. It was a poison. It seeped into the wound, cauterizing the grief into something else, something cold and sharp and heavy. In my darkest hour, I had reached for my family, and they had told me to wait my turn. The hours that followed were a waking nightmare. The first call I should have made was to Mark's parents, Helen and George. When I finally managed to dial their number, my voice was a hollow rasp. The sound that came from Helen when I told her about her son was a sound I will never forget, the sound of a mother's heart breaking. Within an hour, they were at my door. They didn't come with platitudes or empty words. Helen, her own eyes red-rimmed and swollen, simply wrapped her arms around me and held me as I sobbed. George, a man of few words but deep integrity, quietly said about doing the things I couldn't. He called the funeral home. He spoke to the police officer who called me, getting the details my shattered mind couldn't retain. He made a pot of coffee that no one drank. They were grieving their only son, yet their first priority was to shoulder my pain. They were what a family was supposed to be. Friends started arriving in a steady, gentle stream. My best friend, Sarah, took one look at me and then went straight to Lily, scooping her up and taking her into the backyard to look for fairies, shielding her from the initial storm of adult grief. Casseroles appeared on the counter. Someone took my phone and fielded the endless calls. A community, Mark's and mine, wove a net of compassion and support around me, holding me up when my legs refused to. And from my own family, there was only silence. The promised call for tomorrow never came. Not that morning, as I sat with Mark's parents trying to choose a casket, a surreal and barbaric task. Not that afternoon, as I held Lily and tried to explain that Daddy was a star in the sky now, a concept she was too smart to fully accept. I checked my phone obsessively at first. Each time it buzzed, a stupid, hopeful leap would flutter in my chest, only to be crushed when it was another text of condolence from a friend or a cousin on Mark's side. The silence from my parents and brother wasn't just an oversight. It felt like a statement. It was a deliberate message. Your tragedy is an inconvenience to us. Your grief is not as important as our celebration. By the end of the second day, the hope had curdled into a bitter, knowing certainty. I remembered a lifetime of this behavior, 1,000 smaller cuts I had explained away. My high school graduation they'd almost missed because Ethan had a soccer tournament. The way they'd brushed off my promotion at work to gush about a C+ Ethan got on a college paper. Mark had seen it for years. They love the idea of you, Clara, he'd said once gently, but they're in love with him. I had always defended them. Now, their silence was screaming the truth at me, and I had no defense left. Lily, in her heartbreakingly perceptive way, picked up on it. On the third night, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked at me with Mark's serious brown eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, "is Grandma Susan sad about Daddy, too?" I smoothed her hair back from her forehead, my throat tight. "Of course, sweetie. Everyone is sad." "Then why hasn't she called to see if we're okay?" I had no answer for her. The lie I told, that they were just very busy and very sad in their own way, felt like ash in my mouth. I was protecting my 8-year-old daughter from the casual cruelty of her own grandparents, and I knew, in that moment, that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. The soft, forgiving part of my heart had begun to harden. They showed up on the fourth day. The stream of supportive friends had slowed to a trickle, the initial shock had worn off, and the house had settled into a heavy, aching quiet. I was in the kitchen, staring blankly at a mountain of Tupperware containers filled with food I couldn't eat, when the doorbell rang. It was them. My parents, Richard and Susan, and my brother, Ethan, stood on my doorstep. They looked less like mourners and more like they'd gotten lost on their way to a country club brunch. My father wore a crisp polo shirt and pressed khakis. My mother had on a floral blouse and pearls, a large, expensive-looking handbag clutched in her hand. Ethan was texting, barely looking up. "Clara, my mother said, her tone attempting sympathy, but landing somewhere near mild condescension. We came as soon as we could. As soon as they could. 4 days after my husband died. The lie was so bald-faced it was almost impressive. I stepped back wordlessly, letting them into the house that Mark and I had so lovingly built. They walked into the entryway and stopped, their eyes sweeping around not with sadness, but with appraisal. "You've done well for yourselves," my father commented, his gaze lingering on the high ceilings and the hardwood floors. Mark was a good provider. The words were meant to sound like a compliment, but they felt like an inventory. He wasn't acknowledging the man, the husband, the father. He was assessing the assets. My mother walked over to a table laden with floral arrangements from the funeral. She touched a petal on a large bouquet of white lilies. "Who sent these?" she asked, her voice laced with a strange, competitive curiosity. "Mark's company," I said, my own voice flat. Ethan finally looked up from his phone. "Wow. Big house. The property taxes must be a killer." He gave a short, humorless laugh and then his eyes went back to his screen. There were no hugs. No "how are you holding up?" No questions about Lily. The condolences they offered were brief and generic. A terrible shame. So young. Life's not fair. They were hollow phrases, uttered while their eyes roamed my home, taking stock. They settled in my living room, the one with the large picture window that Mark had loved. They sat on the couch where we had cuddled to watch movies, where he'd read stories to Lily. Their presence felt like a desecration. The conversation was a masterclass in emotional tone deafness. They talked about Ethan's party, how wonderful it was, how all their friends had been there. They talked about the rising cost of gas. My father began asking pointed questions, cloaked in a thin veil of concern. "So, Mark had one of those tech jobs, right? They usually have pretty good benefits, don't they? Life insurance and all that." "Richard," my mother chided lightly, though there was no real heat in it. "Don't bother the girl with that now." But her eyes were just as keen, just as hungry. I just stared at them. The grief was still there, a monstrous weight in my chest. But something else was growing beside it, a cold, clear emotion. Disgust. I saw them for exactly what they were. Not family. Not a support system. They were vultures, circling, waiting for the feast. And I, apparently, was the main course. Mark's parents left around noon on the 5th day. They had been my anchors, but they had to return home to begin the grim process of planning their own son's memorial service in their hometown. As I hugged Helen goodbye, she pressed a check into my hand. "For whatever you and Lily need," she'd whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We're here for you. Always." The contrast was a physical blow when, less than an hour later, my own family cornered me. I was standing in the living room, feeling drained and utterly alone, when my father cleared his throat. "Clara, sit down for a minute," he said, gesturing to the armchair opposite the sofa where he, my mother, and Ethan were seated like a tribunal. "We need to talk." I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to crawl into my bed and pull the covers over my head until the world went away. But I sank into the chair, my limbs feeling like lead. Richard leaned forward, clasping his hands together, adopting the patronizing, father-knows-best tone he used when he was about to be particularly unreasonable. "Now, your mother and I have been doing a lot of thinking," he began. "This is a terrible tragedy, of course. A terrible, terrible tragedy. But in these moments, it's important for family to pull together and look after our own." I said nothing. My silence seemed to make him uncomfortable, but he pressed on. "Mark was a smart man. He provided for you. And now there's a significant estate. A windfall, really, if you think about it." Windfall. The word hung in the air, obscene. He was calling the blood money for my husband's death a lottery ticket. A hot, bitter bile rose in my throat. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, but it was my mother who delivered the next line, her voice smooth and practiced, as if they had rehearsed this. "What your father is trying to say, dear, is that we're your family. And family shares its burdens and its blessings." I looked from her face to my father's, then to my brother's. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at a spot on the carpet, the picture of complicity. And then my father said it. The words that shattered the last, microscopic shard of affection I might have had left for them. So, your mother and we've talked it over. We think it's only fair, only right, that 50% of the estate comes to us. To the family. He had the gall to smile, a thin, tight-lipped expression. It'll give Ethan the start he deserves. Help him buy a house, get on his feet. You and Lily will still have more than enough. It's the responsible thing to do. 50%. They wanted half. Half of the house I shared with Mark. Half of the savings we had built together. Half of the life insurance policy that was meant to protect me and our daughter in the event of the unthinkable. The unthinkable had happened, and they saw it as their payday. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with manipulative sweetness. It's what Mark would have wanted, dear. For family to be taken care of. That broke me. Not in the way they expected. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The tidal wave of grief that had been drowning me for 5 days receded in an instant, and the water left behind froze solid. Something inside me went utterly, terrifyingly cold. The pain was still there, a giant, gaping hole where my heart used to be. But it was now encased in a thick, impenetrable layer of ice. The tears I had been crying were for my husband, for my lost future. The emptiness I felt now was for the family I realized I never had. I looked at their 3 expectant faces. Greedy. Entitled. Vultures in polo shirts and pearls. They had mistaken my grief for weakness. They had chosen a birthday party over my broken heart. And now, they wanted to profit from my husband's death. I didn't say a word. I just looked at them, my expression completely blank. I let the silence stretch, watching the confidence drain from their faces, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. They didn't know it yet. They couldn't possibly understand the fundamental shift that had just occurred. But I knew. They had started a war. And I, fueled by the memory of a great love and a betrayal of biblical proportions, was going to finish it. The day after my family's monstrous demand, I woke up with a new and terrifying clarity. The fog of grief had not lifted, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a paralyzing shroud. It was a cold, clear lens through which I saw the world and my family for what they truly were. My first and only call was to the number on the business card the police officer had given me, the card for Mark's estate lawyer, a Mr. Alistair Davies. His office was on the 45th floor of a skyscraper downtown, a world of polished steel, muted gray carpets, and panoramic views of Elliott Bay. It felt a million miles away from the cloying, grief-stricken atmosphere of my home. The air here was thin, clean, and smelled of money and authority. Mr. Davies was not what I expected. I had pictured a shark in a pinstripe suit. Instead, the man who rose to greet me was in his late 60s, with a kind, weathered face, a shock of white hair, and intelligent eyes that held a deep, compassionate sadness. He shook my hand gently but firmly. Mrs. Vance. Clara. Please come in, he said, his voice a calm baritone. I cannot tell you how sorry I am for your loss. Mark was more than a client. He was an exceptionally good man. The genuine sympathy in his voice almost broke the icy dam I had built around my emotions. I simply nodded, afraid that if I tried to speak, I would sob. He seemed to understand, gesturing for me to sit in a supple leather chair facing his large mahogany desk. Mark was meticulous, Mr. Davies began, sitting opposite me. He was one of the most forward-thinking clients I've ever had. He wanted to ensure that, no matter what happened, you and Lily would be unequivocally, unassailably protected. He paused, his gaze steady and meaningful. From all eventualities. I knew what he meant. He knew. Mark had told him. A wave of relief, so potent it was almost dizzying, washed over me. I wasn't alone in this. Mr. Davies slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished surface of the desk. My name was written on the front in Mark's familiar, slightly slanted handwriting. He left this with me 5 years ago, the lawyer explained softly. His instructions were very specific. In the event of his death, I was to give it to you, and only you, before any official reading of the will took place. He said you would know what to do. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt warm, as if it still held a trace of his touch. I used my nail to slit the seal, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside were several pages, filled with his handwriting. I began to read. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the unthinkable has happened, and I have left you and our sweet Lily alone. I cannot write the words to express the sorrow I feel knowing I am not there to hold you. Please know, my love, that every moment I had with you was the best moment of my life. You are my everything. Always. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the ink. I blinked them back fiercely, forcing myself to continue. I love you too much to leave you unprotected. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about them. Your family. I know you have a good heart, a heart that always wants to see the best in people, even when they don't deserve it. You've defended them to me 100 times, and I love you for that loyalty.
But I have seen things you chose not to.
I have seen the way your father looks at our home, the way your mother talks about my income, the way they treat Ethan like a prince, and you like an afterthought. I have always feared that if anything happened to me, their greed would descend upon you when you are at your most vulnerable. I pray I am wrong. I pray they have surrounded you with love and support, and that this letter is nothing more than the paranoid ramblings of an overprotective husband. I pray you can burn this and laugh about how silly I was. But if I am not wrong, if they have shown their true colors, then I have left you a weapon. It is not something I ever wanted to use, but it is something I felt I had to have. A ghost in the machine. A final act of protecting my girls. Go to my office. Behind the leather-bound collection of Hemingway's short stories, there is a small, hidden panel. The safe is behind it. The code is Lily's birthday, the European way, day, month, year. Inside, you will find a black ledger. Everything you need to know is in there. Whatever you find, know that I did it out of love, to protect our life, and to secure your future. Be strong, my love. You are stronger than any of them. Yours forever, Mark. I folded the letter, my hands steady now. The grief was still there, a cavern in my soul. But Mark's words had built a bridge across it. He had known. He had seen it all. And he had prepared. The lawyer watched me, his expression unreadable but patient. Mrs. Vance, he asked gently. I looked up at him, my eyes clear and dry. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. I believe my husband has left me some very important paperwork at home. We need to reschedule the will reading. Driving home, I felt like a different woman than the one who had driven to the lawyer's office that morning. The grief was my passenger, buckled in beside me, but I was the one in control. For the first time in 5 days, I had a purpose beyond just surviving the next breath. I had a mission assigned to me by the man I loved. I let myself into the quiet house. Lily was with Mark's parents for the day, a small mercy. I walked straight to his office. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark wood, shelves overflowing with books on history and coding, and a single, perfect photograph of Lily and me on his desk. The scent of him, of old books, coffee, and his subtle cologne, still lingered. My hand trembled as I ran it along the spines of the books. I found the Hemingway collection, its leather-worn and soft. Just as he'd written, my fingers found a small indentation behind it. I pressed. With a soft click, a section of the bookshelf receded, revealing the flat, gray metal door of a wall safe. My breath caught. I spun the dial, entering Lily's birthday as he'd instructed. August 14th, 17. The heavy door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst copies of our passports, birth certificates, and some emergency cash, was a thick, black, leather-bound ledger. Beside it lay a heavy manila envelope, sealed with wax. I took the ledger to his desk and sat in his chair. It felt like commanding a ship. With a deep breath, I opened it. The pages were filled with neat columns of numbers, dates, and notations in Mark's handwriting. It wasn't an accountant's log, it was a story. The story began 7 years ago. My father's small construction company, his lifelong source of pride and income, was on the verge of bankruptcy due to a series of bad bids and his own mismanagement. He was leveraged to the hilt, about to lose not only his business but my parents' home as well. He was, as Mark noted in the margin, desperate and too proud to ask me for help directly. So Mark had arranged it. Through Mr. Davies's firm, he'd created a shell corporation, a third-party investment vehicle. This investor offered my father a lifeline, a private loan of $350,000. It was enough to save the business and the house. The terms were standard but strict, a 7% annual interest rate, compounded quarterly. My father, relieved and blinded by his own ego, had signed it without a second thought. He boasted for months about the savvy investor who had recognized the potential in his company. He had no idea the money had come from his son-in-law. But the ledger told the next part of the story. 2 years after the initial loan, Mark had legally dissolved the shell corporation and, as its sole owner, personally acquired the debt. He had purchased my father's debt to him. He was the creditor. I flipped through the pages. Each quarter, for 5 years, Mark had meticulously calculated the interest, adding it to the principal. He never made a single call to collect. He never mentioned it. He just let it grow. I did a quick calculation on my phone, my fingers flying across the screen. The original $350,000, with 7 years of compounding interest, was now, my God. It was over $580,000. I finally opened the wax-sealed envelope. Inside was the original, signed promissory note. My father's arrogant, flourishing signature was right at the bottom. It was an ironclad, legally binding contract. He didn't just owe money to some faceless company. He owed it, personally, to the estate of Mark Vance. An estate now controlled entirely by me. I leaned back in Mark's chair, the document cool against my fingertips. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a nuclear bomb. Mark hadn't just suspected their greed. He had quantified it, put a price on it, and handed me the detonator. He had known that a day might come when they would demand their share. And he had arranged it so that their share would be a debt so crushing it would obliterate the very foundation of their comfortable, entitled lives. A slow, cold smile touched my lips for the first time in days. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of grim, absolute certainty. The ghost in the machine had given me my orders. My second meeting with Mr. Davies was different. I walked in not as a grieving widow seeking comfort, but as a general laying battle plans. I placed the ledger and the promissory note on his desk. He put on his reading glasses and examined the documents in silence. He read every line of the note, his fingers tracing my father's signature. He flipped through the ledger, his eyes taking in Mark's meticulous records. A long, slow whistle escaped his lips. "My word," he said, looking at me over the rim of his glasses. A glint of something, admiration, maybe even righteous satisfaction, shone in his eyes. Mark Vance. The man played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. This is airtight, Clara. Beautifully, brutally airtight. They want 50% of the estate, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They demanded it 2 days ago. Mr. Davies leaned back, a grim smile playing on his lips. Oh, did they?
Well,
it seems they are about to be reminded of the difference between assets and liabilities. Theatrically so. We spent the next hour mapping it out. The plan was simple, elegant, and cruel. We would schedule the official will reading. We would let them come, full of their arrogant expectations. We would read Mark's actual will, which, as Mr. Davies confirmed, left everything to the trust for me and Lily. We would let their rage and entitlement boil over. And then, at the peak of their fury, we would deliver the checkmate. Theatrics are important in these matters, Mr. Davies said, a new, sharper edge to his voice. Let them expose their true character in front of a legal witness, me. Let them make their threats. It will only make the fall that much harder. There was one last piece of the plan, the most difficult and delicate part. When I got home that evening, I found Lily sitting on her bed, talking to her favorite stuffed bear. And then Mommy was sad, but Daddy is a star, so he is watching us, she was explaining seriously to the bear. My heart ached. I sat down next to her, pulling her into my lap. Lily, my sweet girl, I began, my voice soft. Do you remember how Daddy always said we were his team and we had to protect each other? She nodded, her big brown eyes fixed on me. Team Vance. That's right. Well, Daddy left us a very important, very secret mission. Just for us. I took a deep breath. In a few days, we're going to go to Mr. Davies' office. Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Ethan will be there. And they're going to be a little loud. They might be upset. Because they miss Daddy too? She asked, her innocence a sharp pain. Something like that. I hedged. But Daddy left a special letter for them. And he wants you to be the one to give it to them. It's a secret mission just from him to you. Can you be brave and do that for Daddy? I showed her the plain white envelope, now containing the promissory note and the formal demand for payment Mr. Davies had drafted. Her small fingers traced the outline of it. Will this letter make them stop being mean to you, Mommy? She asked, her perception once again astonishing me. I hugged her tight, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and her childhood. Yes, sweetie, I whispered, the words tasting like both victory and sin. I think it will. I really think it will. The day of the reading arrived cloaked in a perpetual Seattle drizzle. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple, severe black dress. My hair was pulled back in a tight chignon. I wore no jewelry except for my wedding band. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a woman with shadows under her eyes, but a spine made of iron. Lily was waiting with Mr. Davies's kind secretary in an adjoining room, armed with a coloring book and the white envelope resting on the table beside her. I entered the conference room alone. They were already there. My father, mother, and Ethan sat on one side of the long, polished table, a united front of greed. My father looked impatient, checking his watch. My mother was examining her cuticles, feigning boredom. Ethan was slouched in his chair, radiating smug entitlement. Clara, my father said, by way of greeting. Let's get this over with. I didn't reply, taking my seat opposite them, next to Mr. Davies. He gave me a brief, reassuring nod before clearing his throat. We are gathered for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Mark Daniel Vance, he announced, his voice filling the room. As the legal counsel for the deceased and the executor of this will, I will now. Yes, get on with it, Alistair, my father interrupted. We all know what it's going to say. Let's just get to the part where we discuss the distribution. Mr. Davies fixed him with a stare so cold it seemed to drop the temperature in the room. Richard, if you interrupt me again, I will have you removed and we will proceed without you. Is that understood? My father's face flushed a dull red, but he fell silent. Mr. Davies proceeded to read the will. It was, as he'd said, simple and ironclad. Mark's language was clear, loving, and precise. He acknowledged his wife, Clara, and his daughter, Lily, as the sole joys of his life. He bequeathed a few sentimental items to his own parents. And then came the primary clause. All the remainder of my estate, including all real property, stocks, bonds, savings, and the full payout of all life insurance policies, I bequeath to the Mark and Clara Vance Family Trust, to be managed by my wife, Clara Vance, as the sole trustee and executor for the exclusive benefit of herself and our daughter, Lily Vance. He finished reading and laid the document down. A thick, heavy silence filled the room. My mother was the first to break it. What does that mean? She asked, her voice shrill. What about us? What about the family? It means, Mr. Davies said calmly, that everything belongs to the trust controlled by Clara. Nothing. Ethan blurted out, sitting bolt upright. He left us nothing? After all we did for her. My father slammed his hand on the table, making me flinch. This is an outrage. An insult. He was always a selfish bastard, turning our daughter against us. We'll contest this, my mother shrieked, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. Clara is obviously not in her right mind. She's grieving. We can have her declared incompetent. This is elder abuse. The sheer audacity of the accusation that they were the victims was breathtaking. They raged, their voices overlapping, a chorus of pure, ugly greed. They threatened lawsuits. They insulted Mark's memory. They accused me of manipulating him. And through it all, I sat perfectly still. I didn't defend. I didn't argue. I just watched them, letting them pour all their poison out into the sterile air of the conference room. I let them build their own gallows, right in front of a witness. I let them prove exactly who Mark knew they were. The crescendo of their rage was reaching its peak. My father was on his feet now, his face a mottled purple, pointing a shaking finger at Mr. Davies. "You won't get away with this, you shyster. We have rights. We are her family." My mother was sobbing, not tears of grief, but of thwarted avarice. 50%. That's all we asked for. It was fair. It was at that precise moment that Mr. Davies gave me the slightest of nods. It was my cue. I turned my head and gave a small, almost imperceptible signal towards the door. A moment later, it opened. The chaos in the room ceased instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. All three of them froze, their angry words dying in their throats. Lily stood in the doorway. She was just a little girl in a blue dress, her hair in two neat braids. She looked small and fragile in the imposing office, but her gaze was steady. In her hand, she held the plain, white envelope. She walked slowly, deliberately, across the room. Her footsteps were the only sound. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on her grandparents. She stopped directly in front of my father. She held up the envelope. "You forgot this," she said, her voice high and clear, cutting through the thick tension. She looked from my father to my mother, her expression one of childish solemnity. "This is why you came, right?" The words, so simple, so direct, landed with the force of a physical blow. It was an accusation and a judgment, made all the more damning by the innocence of the messenger. For a split second, I saw shame flicker in my mother's eyes, before it was extinguished by confusion. My father, flustered, snatched the envelope from her hand. "What is this nonsense?" he grumbled, tearing it open with an aggressive rip. He pulled out the contents. I saw his eyes scan the first page, the crisp, formal letter from Davies and Associates. I saw the moment his brain processed the legal language, the phrases demand for payment, outstanding debt, principal plus accrued interest. I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. Then his gaze fell upon the second document. The old, slightly yellowed paper. The promissory note. His own signature, arrogant and bold, at the bottom. His hands began to shake. It wasn't a slight tremor. It was a violent, uncontrollable quake, as if his entire nervous system was short-circuiting. The papers rattled furiously in his grasp. My mother, sensing the shift, leaned over. "Richard? What is it?" She looked at the paper, her eyes widening in disbelief. Ethan crowded in behind them, his jaw going slack as he read over their shoulders. I saw the number. The final, damning number, calculated to the penny by Mr. Davies. $584,217.34. My mother let out a choked, gagging sound and sank back into her chair, her hand flying to her mouth. Ethan stared, his face a mask of stupid, uncomprehending horror. My father just stood there, shaking, the documents that represented his complete and utter ruin held in his trembling hands. They had come expecting to take half of my husband's legacy. Instead, they had just been handed a bill that would consume all of theirs and then some. In the dead silence of the room, I finally met my father's eyes. The rage was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was the hollow, terrified gaze of a man who had just fallen off a cliff and was only now realizing there was no ground beneath him. And my expression? It was nothing. A perfect, placid blank. The ghost in the machine had closed its account. The silence in the conference room was a living thing. It was thick with the dust of my family's shattered entitlement. My father stood frozen, the papers rattling in his hand like dry leaves in a winter wind. My mother's face was a grotesque mask of shock, her mouth slightly agape. Ethan looked back and forth between the promissory note and my face, his own expression one of dawning, idiotic horror. It was my father who finally broke the spell, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is a mistake. A joke. Mr. Davies, who had been watching the scene with the placid interest of a biologist observing a petri dish, leaned forward slightly. I assure you, Mr. Vance, it is no joke, he said, his voice calm and clinical. The note is authentic. The signatures are verified. The interest has been legally calculated according to the terms you yourself agreed to, and the estate of Mark Vance is now formally calling in the debt. Payment is due in full. Payment, my mother shrieked, finding her voice. We don't have that kind of money. Nobody has that kind of money. Then I suggest you consult with a bankruptcy attorney, Mr. Davies replied smoothly. The estate will, of course, place liens on all known assets, including your home, any vehicles, and all bank accounts, pending payment. We can also discuss wage garnishments if you prefer. The clinical, legal terms were more devastating than any shouted insult could have been. They weren't just being denied a windfall, they were being systematically dismantled. You can't do this, my father bellowed, his denial finally giving way to impotent rage. He turned his wild eyes on me. Clara, you can't let him do this. I'm your father. I looked at him, at this man who had demanded half of my dead husband's estate to fund my brother's lifestyle. I thought of the sound of the party in the background of that phone call. I thought of Lily asking why her grandma hadn't called. You should have thought of that when you were cutting Ethan's cake, I said, my voice as quiet and cold as a tombstone. It was the only thing I had said directly to them, and it landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. I then turned to my lawyer. Mr. Davies, I'd like to go home to my daughter now. Please handle this. My father's face crumpled. The rage evaporated, replaced by a desperate, pleading terror. Clara, please. Don't do this to us. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Sorry, my mother sobbed, grabbing onto the new narrative. We're so sorry, Clara. Your father. He gets ideas in his head. We were just trying to look out for the family. For you. How could you do this to your own mother? Ethan, finally understanding the depth of the hole they were in, turned on them. You told me we were getting money, he whined, his voice cracking. You told me everything was going to be fine. What did you do? Their united front crumbled into a pathetic circular firing squad of blame and panic. It was a wretched, ugly scene. Mr. Davies stood up, a silent signal to the stout, impassive security guard who had been standing discreetly by the door. I believe this meeting is concluded, Mr. Davies announced. My office will be in touch with your legal counsel. If you don't have one, I suggest you retain one immediately. Frank will show you out. They were herded out of the room like unruly livestock, my father sputtering, my mother weeping hysterically, my brother looking utterly lost. As the door closed behind them, a profound silence descended. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for my entire adult life. I walked to the adjoining room where Lily was patiently coloring. She looked up and smiled, holding up her drawing of a rainbow-colored unicorn. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I smiled back, and it was real. The war was over. Now I just had to deal with the refugees. The days that followed were an exercise in managing the fallout. My family, having been barred from contacting Mr. Davies directly without counsel, turned their full, desperate attention on me. My phone became a vessel for their spiraling panic. First came the voicemails. From my father. Heavy breathing, sound of liquor being poured. Clara, you listen to me. You think you're so high and mighty with your dead husband's lawyer? You're still my daughter. I forbid you from doing this. You call it off. You hear me? You call it off right now, or you will regret it. I am warning you. For my mother. Weeping, theatrical sobs. Clara, baby, it's mommy. I can't sleep. I can't eat. My nerves are shot. How could you be so cruel? After all the sacrifices I made for you, the dance lessons, the braces, do you remember? We used to be so close. Please, just call me. We can fix this. Just you and me. Please, baby. From Ethan. Whining, panicked. Clara? It's Ethan.
Pick up.
Look, my credit card was just declined at the grocery store. The grocery store. And I got a call from the bank. They're talking about my car. My car, Clara. You have to call this off. This isn't fair. It wasn't my fault. Then came the texts, a frantic machine gun burst of desperation. Dad, answer your phone. Dad, this is not a request. Mom, Clara, I know you see these messages. Your father is not well. You are stressing him out. Ethan, did you know they can just freeze your bank account? WTF, Clara. Dad, I'm selling the house. The house you grew up in. I hope you're happy. I read them all with a strange sense of detachment. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound and weary sadness. It was like watching a documentary about a species of animal that was woefully unequipped for survival, a species that had no one to blame for its extinction but itself. The news came in trickles from other sources, too. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, and a notorious gossip called under the guise of offering condolences. Oh, Clara, it's just awful, she'd said, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. Your mother called me in hysterics. Said you'd stolen their life savings. And Richard is trying to sell the house for half of what it's worth, and poor Ethan had to move back in with them. I told Susan, there must be a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Aunt Carol, I said calmly. Thank you for your concern. Each message, each piece of gossip, solidified my resolve. Their suffering was a consequence of their own choices. They had gambled, betting on my grief and weakness, and they had lost. The revenge, however, was starting to feel like its own kind of prison. Their frantic energy was still directed at me, their poison still aimed at my life. I wasn't free. I had them on a leash, but we were still chained together. I realized then that the goal wasn't to hold the leash forever. The goal was to cut it completely. A week after the reading, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole, and my stomach tightened. It was my mother, standing alone on my porch. She looked diminished. Her usually immaculate hair was messy, she wore no makeup, and her expensive blouse was wrinkled. It was a carefully crafted performance of a woman brought low. For a long moment, I considered not opening the door. But I knew this was a confrontation I had to face. This was the final battle. I opened the door, but left the security chain on. Clara, she breathed, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. Thank God. I had to see you. What do you want, Mom? I asked, my voice flat. I wanted to apologize, she said, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. For everything. I waited. Your father, she continued, shaking her head as if to absolve herself. He gets these ideas. He's so proud, so worried about money. And with Ethan, he just wants to give him every advantage. He puts so much pressure on me. I never wanted to hurt you, you have to believe that. I was just trying to keep the peace, to do what was best for the family. It was a masterwork of manipulative self-absolution. Every sentence was an excuse, a way to shift blame. It was about his pride, his pressure, Ethan's needs. There was no ownership, no true remorse for her own actions. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. She was sorry there were consequences. And in that moment, listening to her weave her web of lies, I felt the last vestige of filial obligation wither and die. The love a child is supposed to have for a parent, the bond one had tried to believe in for 30 years, evaporated into nothing. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. She was a black hole of need, and I was finally, blessedly, out of her gravitational pull. I saw the endgame with perfect clarity. If I let her in, if I showed an ounce of weakness, this would never end. There would be endless requests for money, for help, for forgiveness. They would be a permanent fixture in my life, a constant source of toxicity for me and for Lily. They were a disease, and the only cure was amputation. I reached up and slid the security chain off, but only to open the door fully, so she could see the cold, final emptiness in my eyes. It's too late, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You stood there and listened to my brother's birthday party while I was telling you my husband was dead. You came into my house and demanded half of everything he worked for. You did that. Not Dad. Not Ethan.
You.
You made your choice a long time ago. Now I'm making mine. I saw the flicker of hope die in her eyes, replaced by her familiar, venomous resentment. Her mask slipped. You ungrateful, she began to hiss. But I didn't wait for the rest. I closed the door softly in her face, the quiet click of the deadbolt echoing the final, permanent closing of a door in my heart. I met with Mr. Davies the next day. I don't want their money, I told him, the words feeling truer than anything I had said in weeks. I don't want to spend the next 10 years as their creditor, hounding them for payments. I don't want any connection at all. I want them to be ghosts. Mr. Davies listened, a thoughtful expression on his face. He tented his fingers and nodded slowly. A clean break, he murmured. Annulling the debt gives them no further reason to contact you. But a gift of that magnitude, they may see it as weakness, an opening. So we attach a condition, I said, the idea forming in my mind. A price. Not in money. In something else. A slow, grim smile spread across my lawyer's face. He understood immediately. The price is silence, he said. The price is absence. It's an extraordinary measure, but given the circumstances, I believe it's not only possible, but beautifully poetic. He drafted the document that afternoon. It was called a familial relinquishment and settlement agreement. It was the most brutal and merciful document I had ever seen. The terms were simple. Clause 1. The estate of Mark Vance, represented by executor Clara Vance, would forgive, in its entirety, the outstanding debt of $584,217.34, with all liens to be lifted and all collections efforts to cease immediately. Clause 2. In consideration for this financial forgiveness, Richard and Susan Vance would voluntarily and irrevocably terminate all legal parental rights to their daughter, Clara Vance. They would legally cease to be her parents. Clause 3. Richard Vance, Susan Vance, and Ethan Vance would agree to a permanent, legally binding, and court-enforced no-contact order, barring them from any and all communication, direct or indirect, with Clara Vance and her daughter, Lily Vance, for the remainder of their natural lives. It was a simple choice. Their money or their family. Their financial freedom or their daughter and granddaughter. It was a test I knew they were guaranteed to fail, and in failing, they would give me the only thing I truly wanted. Mr. Davies sent the offer to the beleaguered legal aid lawyer my father had been forced to hire. We gave them 48 hours to decide. The call came 24 hours later. They've accepted the terms, Mr. Davies said, his voice flat. They'll sign tomorrow. I closed my eyes. There was no victory, only a hollow ache. They had sold me. For the price of a debt they brought upon themselves, they had signed me away. Mark hadn't just left me a weapon. He had left me an escape hatch. And my family, true to form to the very end, had willingly pushed me through it. 1 year later, the air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine and ancient stone. I stood at the edge of the world, a thermos of hot chocolate in my hand, and watched as the first fingers of dawn crept over the lip of the Grand Canyon. The sky bled from deep indigo to violet, then to a fiery orange that set the vast rock formations ablaze with light. Beside me, Lily, now 9 years old, gasped. It looks like the world is on fire, Mommy. It's beautiful, isn't it? I said, pulling her closer, wrapping our shared blanket tighter around our shoulders. We had made it. The trip Mark had planned was different now, shaped by our new reality, but we were on it. We had driven through deserts, seen mountains that scraped the sky, and counted constellations in skies free from city lights. We were healing. The past year had been one of quiet rebuilding. The legal papers had been signed. My family had vanished from my life as completely as if they'd never existed. There were no more calls, no more texts, no more secondhand gossip from concerned aunts. There was only peace. I had sold the house in Seattle. It held too many ghosts, both good and bad, and moved with Lily to a smaller town a few hours away, a place nestled in the mountains where no one knew our story. We had a little house with a garden where I was successfully growing basil, and Lily had joined a soccer team. We were building a new life, a smaller, simpler, stronger one, on the foundations Mark had left for us. I thought of him now, not with the sharp, agonizing pain of loss, but with a warm, enduring ache of love. His final act hadn't been one of revenge, I finally understood. It had been an act of liberation. He had known I would never be strong enough to cut the cord myself, so he had handed me the scissors. My revenge hadn't been in ruining my family. The ultimate revenge had been in rendering them completely, utterly irrelevant. They were a footnote in a chapter of my life that was now closed. Their power over me was gone. I was free. Daddy would have loved this, wouldn't he? Lily asked, her voice soft in the quiet morning air. I looked down at my daughter, her face illuminated by the rising sun, her eyes full of wonder, not sorrow. I smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached my eyes. He would have, sweetie, I said, my voice thick with emotion but free of pain. He really would have. I put my arm around her, and together we watched the light pour into the canyon, chasing away the long shadows, revealing the vast, beautiful, and unknown landscape ahead. Our future, and it was entirely our own. So, in the end, they chose money over family, and I chose peace over punishment. I walked away with my daughter, finally free from their poison forever. But I have to know what you all think. Was I right, or was I too merciful? Let me know in the comments. Should I have offered them that deal, or should I have let them face the full financial consequences of what they did to me in my darkest hour? I will be reading every single opinion.